I'm joined now by our Sunday panelists. John Moore is a talk radio host in Toronto. Jonathan Kay is editor-in-chief at The Walrus magazine. Mubin Sheikh is an ex-CSIS operative and author of Undercover Jihadi. And Irshad Manji is a Canadian author and founder of the Moral Courage Project at New York University and joins us from New York. So, John, I'm going to start with you. It's not new to hear the Prime Minister talking tough, but a lot of people were struck by the language on war he used this week. What did you think?
Personally, I don't think that using the war metaphors is right for what we're facing now. I think the word challenge, which is the word Obama used, is more correct. I don't think that a handful of jihadis in Paris should have the moral right to decide who's at war and who's not at war. This is a horrible problem. We're dealing with it. But war is what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. Dealing with terrorism, it's a chronic problem, and I don't think war is the correct metaphor for what we're dealing with.
John?
Well, there's a lot of clutching of pearls from the usual set who would be quite appalled at any kind of militaristic talk. I just think it's not appropriate. I mean, war suggests, it's World War II. We're going to go into these countries, we're going to take them back, we're going to overthrow the Nazis, and then Germany is going to be restored. That just doesn't happen. I mean, if we're going to go to war, we already did it twice in Afghanistan and Iraq. And, Al-Qaeda and ISIS are still there.
Irshad, what did you think? What struck you in the Prime Minister's speech this week?
I don't think it much matters what he says, Wendy. I think it's what he and his government do that matters. And, for example, if they are talking about expanding the powers of search and detention and arrest, that could be very helpful for national security, but it's important not to go overboard, if only because, the ISIS fighters have been created in overstuffed jail cells. In fact, in France, we see that only 10% of the population, namely Muslim and of Muslim heritage, make up 60% of the prison population. And I do believe that that is going overboard on detention and arrest. We can't afford to do that in Canada.
Mubin, what did you think this week?
Well, this is consistent with the threat matrix that we've been learning about. We've seen our own attacks, the attitudes that Canadians have taken towards those attacks versus the attitudes that Americans have taken, Brits have taken, other Europeans have taken. So the threat is generally the same, but very specific in our particular contexts.
We'll come back to where this might be going in just a moment, Irshad and Mubin in particular. But I guess just in terms of the politics, that Stephen Harper, he didn't use his speech this week to attack his opponents. But I guess it does kind of fit, John, with some of the attack ads about how Justin Trudeau is...
It does, but I don't think they played that card yet. It's in the deck, but they haven't played it. I was actually quite heartened because I interviewed John Baird on Friday on my show. And again, he also refrained from this sort of blaming of the other people or characterizing them as Quislings and Chamberlains. So actually, I have very few objections with how the Prime Minister framed it. It's, as Irshad said, where he goes from here that is the real debate.
John?
I think John is correct that they didn't play that card. But I also think the Conservatives are cognizant of the fact that I think Stephen Harper, in a way, is at his best when things are a little chaotic, when there's a little bit of fear in the air, because he is a comforting presence. He gave a very good speech, for instance, back when Michael Zehaf-Bibeau attacked in Ottawa. I think that plays to his strengths. I think national security plays to Harper's strengths. And although he hasn't attacked Trudeau on this issue of late, I think he is conscious of the fact that he is the clear leader of all the party leaders when it comes to this particular concern Canadians have.
So, Mubin, let's move into what does it mean if we are at war? Who are we at war with, and are we being prepared for stepping up some kind of combat role here? Yeah,
I mean, you can see the attention that was paid to even the Canadian deployment in Iraq. There's a lot of control on the information that comes out of operational stuff in Iraq, and rightfully so. But as everyone has agreed across the board, all our allies, is that an air campaign is not going to be enough. I think particularly they're prepping people for ground invasions of some sort, if not we've already had advisors, quote unquote, deployed in the hundreds, at least by the US and UK standards. So this will continue to increase. It's possible that it's preparing the people for ground invasion and operations, not just in Iraq, but very possibly Syria as well.
Irshad, what's your sense?
I just finished talking about what, ought to be done domestically and what not to be done. But I think on the foreign policy front, look, foreign policy matters to Canadians. We are an internationalist country, unlike the rather insular United States. And I've traveled the world, talking about issues of Islamic reform. I can tell you, Wendy, that our foreign service around the world is seen as a bit of a joke. I myself have encountered that when I was attacked along with my team in Jakarta, Indonesia, tried to get the attention of our Jakarta embassy. I failed utterly until the attack happened, at which point they were all over it. The point is that, foreign service and equipping our foreign service to take these issues seriously, particularly for Canadians traveling abroad, that would be a good first step.
John?
Well, one thing, I agree that would be a good first step, but I also think we should step back and look at the good news we have here in Canada, which is that from a criminal perspective, we've controlled the terrorist threat pretty well. One of the reasons the attack in Ottawa a few months ago was so shocking was because we have been so safe in relative terms since 9/11. Attacks in Canada have been few and far between, in part because of aggressive police action, but we should be careful about characterizing the threat to Canada as being more than it is. Around the world, obviously, the jihadi threat is going to be with us for decades, but we shouldn't treat it as a state of warfare or a state of siege.
Well, I guess if there is to be a step up in the commitment, we don't know where this is going really at this point, but if there is, Canadians would have to feel that there is a serious threat. What are Canadians in the mood for, John, do you think?
That I'm not sure about. I know that I think, largely are in the mood, even moderates are in the mood for what we've already done, which is being part of the air campaign against ISIS. Are we for ground troops? I'm not so sure. And I always say, because there's going to be a lot of rhetoric. What John and I were referring to earlier about people being accused of being cowards if they don't support whatever the government chooses, there's going to be a lot of acrimony. I would say, you know what, then come up with a 2% jihadi tax that we will apply to income taxes. If you want to be serious about fighting terror, show us with your money.
Do you think that there's just this idea, Mubin, of if Canadians feel threatened, if they do feel fear, then they're more likely to want a stepped-up commitment? Do you think, what is the level of fear, not the threat, but the level of fear among Canadians?
I don't think the level of fear is high. I mean, Canada, I think, responds really, really well in the face of these kinds of things. The Muslim population is not as downwardly mobile as it is in Europe and France in particular. The education level is higher. There are more Muslims in the middle class. Huge amounts of tolerance in Canada. So it's very different in that sense. But in terms of Canadians in general, what will it take to step things up? I think we have a good sense of our identity. We don't want to be seen as warmongers. That's not what we are. We're peacemakers. And we will involve ourselves in as much as it resembles that identity more so than a warmongering one.
If I could just jump in.
Wendy, we are peacemakers. Can I just quickly say, we are peacemakers, but we need to be interested in a durable peace, not a sham peace. And that's why I believe it's not enough to simply ally with moderate Muslims. Moderates merely condemn violence. They, after the violence happens, well, big deal. That changes nothing. I think that we need to step up our expectations of Muslims in Canada and ally with reformist Muslims who are looking to create alternate, pluralistic, bold reinterpretations of Islam. And the good news on this front, and there is good news, is that, Canada produces more reformist Muslims, proportionately speaking, than probably any other country in the world.
Come to you in a sec,
Ottawa
Jonathan,
should be investing in them.
Mubin?
Yeah, just a very short clarification of that. I agree with the reformist mentality, and that's good, but I'm more interested in the mainstream community because they're the ones that have the congregants. The mosques are the place where the people are coming, and so partnering with them is very important as well because that's where the numbers are and that's where it matters more.
But has it changed the mood because in the Muslim community in Canada, as if there's one Muslim community,
right. Well,
because of what's happened in Paris this week or because of the Prime Minister's reaction to things?
Condemnation is not going to stop terrorism, just like condemning violent crime doesn't stop crime. There's a soft side to it that communities need to be more involved. The government needs to partner more with communities. There seems to be a deficit in that regard. And I agree, of course, with the pointy end of the stick part. There's already a lot of national security collaboration with America, Britain, France in particular. CSIS and RCMP are already there. The pointy end of the stick is being sharpened and operations are taking place, of course, without our knowledge. So both things need to be done at the same time.
John, you were trying to get in?
I think it's important to draw a distinction between the kind of demographic issues we have in a place like Canada and compare that to France. And one reason is the way we select immigrants. We tend to have better educated immigrants. We tend to have people who have integrated into the middle class, people who are getting university educations. If you look at Canadian societies, Muslims, Arab Muslims in particular, have integrated very well. So I just want to make sure that when Canadians look at what's happening in France and some other European countries, they're not going to think, oh my God, that's happening here in Canada. It's not. Multiculturalism has been much more successful here in Canada than it has, particularly in France, where a lot of Muslims are in ghettos.
And yet we do have our problems. We had the 2 soldiers who were killed. We have the foreign fighters going to, I don't need to tell you that.
We do, but it's an ongoing security operation, and so it should be. You know, when you say it's war, it's not war. It is security. It's about tamping down, you know, it's about eliminating radical Islam, absolutely, and I don't think there's any compromise on that. But to say that, you know, to be able to identify an enemy, we can't.
Could we just emphasize that the 2 Canadian soldiers that were killed last year, both were killed by recent converts who were mentally unstable. They were not products of any kind of organic jihadi movement in the mainstream Islamic community in Canada.
We are out of time, but boy, what a big week, and thank you so much for being part of this.